Thank you. We'll be starting in 1 minute. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. That is the most disciplined audience I think I've ever come across. So thank you for taking your seat so promptly. I'm Philip Selwood. I'm pleased and privileged to be the chair of Zemo and have been for the last 3 years or so. Just to let you know that we have live streamed this event for two reasons. One is, as you can see, we didn't want to make it very uncomfortable in this room because it's obviously only suitable for 50 or 60 guests. But we've got a fair number of people where we're streaming this online. So welcome from me. Firstly, it's my great pleasure to introduce Claire Hay, who many, if not most of you will know as our new executive director. And I'll formally introduce her a bit later on. But this is her first big gig, I think, as the new ED of Zemo. And secondly, it would be much remiss of me not to say a public thank you to Andy Eastlake, who's sitting here in the front row, who has steered the ship, sometimes through rocky waters and sometimes through plain sailing, but for the last 10 years. So on behalf of everybody here and indeed the sector, we give due thanks to all the efforts that he has put in as CEO of Zemo. So thank you again. Many of you will have attended the 20-year anniversary of Zemo, that was the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership at City Hall in June last year, to celebrate the many, many achievements that Andy and his team and the sector indeed have delivered in partnership with government, industry and academia. I just wanted to possibly just mention two or three, just to remind ourselves on this, if you like, relaunch of Zemo, what's been achieved. The organisation has led on the development of clean buses. It's developed a whole series around green bus funds. We were the first to launch what effectively became the consumer label, the Econ label. Andy particularly, but not exclusively, has led with government colleagues a whole bunch of work on life cycle analysis and accreditation of renewable fuels, along with Gloria, who's led on that area of activity. And in association with a whole host of organisations in the sector, led by Jonathan Murray, we were the secretariat for the EV Energy Task Force, which I think most in the sector saw as a leading exemplar of how organisations can work together across different sectors. So just a few examples of things that have actually been achieved, because sometimes I think we are rather reluctant to celebrate the things that have been achieved in our desire to achieve even more, which is entirely laudable, but nonetheless, sometimes we need to look back and see where we've actually come from. Part of the ability to deliver that has been a very, very close relationship with government over that 20 years, and also a strong, diverse sectoral membership covering academia, industry, not-for-profits and governments, both here and overseas. To that end, I'm really, really pleased to be able to announce two things today as part of this morning's event. Firstly, to announce the launch of a new public-private partnership for Zemo with the Welsh Government. And it's going to be called the Welsh Commercial Vehicle Decarbonisation Programme. It will deliver a bespoke strategy for Wales, covering both heavy and light-duty commercial vehicles. I believe it's going to be leading of its type and will focus on sustainable fuels, electrification, and the potential role for hydrogen. We think this could be, and I'm sure the Welsh Government also agree, that this could be a trailblazer project, not just for Wales, but for other regions of the UK and beyond. And we're really delighted to launch that today. And we have, I'm pleased to say, Dafydd Munro, who's head of Transport Decarbonisation from Wales, here in the audience. Welcome, Dafydd. And we thank him and the Welsh Government for showing such support and confidence in Zemo going forward. The second announcement, which is the main reason we originally got everybody together today, is to launch the Council for Net Zero Transport. this, and I'm sure there'll be questions from the audience, but essentially this will bring together in a smaller, more distinct, more senior group of stakeholders from government, industry and academia. And the whole point of the council will be to help lead at a strategic level into the crucial delivery phase for net carbon transport decarbonisation. And I'm delighted that Lord Deben has agreed to chair the council on behalf of Zemo and the sector. And some of you who are sharp-eyed may have noticed that Lord Deben was in the building. Unfortunately, because of the relatively short nature of this event, he was already booked. So if you bump into him in the building as you are leaving, it's not that he's ignored us, and I'll come to why in a minute. It's just that he had a prior engagement and just totally coincidentally happens to be in this building. But we haven't got him in person, but what we do have is a short video.
People will be demanding the solutions which will be more and more difficult. And that's why the council is so important. And we have to do something. Now, I'm very pleased that this initiative has really attracted so many partners. Very happy. I very much believe it's at the heart of the fact. Doing the right thing turns out to make business sense as well. We've got to get there. And the quicker we get on with it, so I welcome the launch today. And I very much hope that all those who are major players will become partners together in solving this fundamental problem.
Okay, thanks very much. We will be in due course announcing both the terms of reference and the membership of council. We are already in conversation with leading figures from the sectors that I mentioned earlier. So watch this space on that. I think I just wanted to make one point about the council. The council is not Zemo's initiative. It's actually the sector's initiative. As a result of the many stakeholder meetings that Claire held when she published her report last year, and also Jonathan led on behalf of Zemo, the almost unremitting call from the various sectors was that we needed something to bring this together. And the emphasis is not going to be on trying to do government's job in terms of development policy. That is not what it's about. It's about how we translate policy, as John Gummer just said, into delivery, into action. Because, let's be frank, we're not short of policy. In fact, in some cases, we could claim to be world class in some areas of policy. But I think when it comes to delivery, we are still sorely lacking. And that's really the gap that we're hoping the council will fill. So without further ado, I'd just like to introduce formally Claire Hay, as I say, as our new executive director, who will be known to many of you. Ex of Greener Journeys and Greener Vision, very much intimate with the Transport Knowledge Hub, and also chairing one of the key delivery mechanisms for JACU, or DEFRA. So without further ado, over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you all very much for coming. Absolutely brilliant to see such a great turnout. And I'm glad that we're also able to make this available to the wider Zemo membership. So I just want to start really with a few reflections as I see it. I mean, our world is changing fast. We are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. Extreme weather events are now a regular occurrence. And migration patterns are only set to rise as more parts of the world become uninhabitable. But in addition to this, we are living through a period of heightened geopolitical tensions. Wars in Ukraine and the Middle East are having a direct impact in the form of rising energy costs, higher prices, and growing business anxiety about the security of supply chains. Our dependency on fossil fuels exacerbates the existential threat we face of climate change, but it is also exposing us to ever-increased risks, which is why it is so critical that we don't let up on efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The UK has a strong track record. The Climate Change Act of 2008 was the first piece of legislation of its kind anywhere in the world. We were the first advanced economy to commit to net zero by 2050. And businesses have responded because the market signals have been clear. The UK can boast of world-leading growth in offshore wind and clean energy. But having been trailblazers, we're now at risk of being outpaced by our international competitors. A race is on to see who will win the new green industries. We need to move fast to maximize the opportunities, and an ambitious industrial strategy would be a catalyst for new technologies and information and innovation, and crucially would bring jobs and manufacturing to the UK. But importantly, and most crucially of all, if we are to retain business and investor confidence, the UK's commitment to net zero must remain unequivocal. We have some world-leading targets. Now, what we now need is a laser-like focus on delivery. As a key partner of government, Zemo Partnership has played a central role in accelerating transport to zero emissions since 2003. Last year, as Philip mentioned, I consulted Zemo's stakeholders on what their priorities were for the net zero transition. The overwhelming conclusion was that we urgently need to bring the focus to a practical level. The phase we are in now is one of implementation and scale up. We can celebrate the success of the EV rollout so far, but big challenges remain if we are to achieve mass market penetration. The integration of transport and energy will be critical, and the Electric Vehicle Energy Task Force, hosted by Zemo, was seen to be an excellent initiative which should be built on. We need solutions for freight, and policy must be designed to ensure that SMEs are not penalised. We need to scale up zero-emission buses, whilst also protecting our vital local bus networks. And crucially, the carbon impact from transport is the sum of all the vehicles on the roads. We must maximise the potential for low-carbon renewable fuels. And we can't develop policy for net zero transport emissions without considering the wider policy context. We need to consider air quality, implications for roads policy, whole vehicle life cycle emissions. Climate change has been described as the biggest market failure the world has ever seen. And at root of this is the failure to price properly for carbon. We need to think holistically about how we can maximise the efficiency of our transport system. And we need cross-party agreement to find a new way of paying for road use to replace fuel duty as the fleet electrifies. If we do nothing about the cost structures, we are baking in rising traffic growth, rising congestion at the expense of more beneficial alternatives. Now, in this critical delivery phase, our focus must turn to local decision makers who are making many of the key infrastructure investment decisions. In fact, it is often easier to make progress on net zero through place-based solutions because it's easier at a regional level to develop integrated strategies for transport, housing, skills, and economic development. We must ensure that our local leaders are enabled to develop long-term integrated strategies for net zero on an integrated long-term basis. That's the key. So bringing all of this together will be no small feat. We need a credible and detailed delivery roadmap, which Zemo is well placed to develop based on feedback from its broad cross-sectoral membership and through its working group structures. The work that we are doing for the Welsh Government is the start of making this happen. And the Council for Net Zero Transport will guide and oversee what we're doing, and will also steer the UK's transport decarbonisation as it moves through this critical delivery phase. And the delivery roadmap will be an important tool, an invaluable tool to influence policy. Whatever the outcome of the next election, the fundamental challenges remain the same. At a time of severe strain on our public finances, with the country facing protracted cost of living and energy crises, our commitment to net zero must remain unequivocal. And to maintain support, we must ensure that that transition is a fair and just transition. Above all, we've got to win hearts and minds. The easy wins have happened. The hard yards are yet to come. 8 out of 10 people in the UK are concerned about climate change, but are unsure what they should do. We need a big, open, informed public debate on net zero. The current risk is that electioneering based on short-term electoral gain will undermine public support for net zero in the long term. We can't let that happen. The rise of populism threatens an erosion of our public debate and is undermining our capacity to make difficult decisions. Politically unpalatable choices are avoided, and across the world, we are seeing a backlash against green policies. But the counter-narrative is the correct one. As Chris Skidmore highlighted in his review, net zero is the growth opportunity of the 21st century. It is vital that we sell the benefits. The net zero transition will mean cleaner air, better health outcomes, reduced congestion, more equitable access, and enhanced energy security. This is our chance to build a cleaner, fairer, safer future. So, that said, I have a few questions before we open, if I may, Philip, into the broader Q&A. I was so grateful for the feedback that I got through the many people that I spoke to last year. And I feel I would just really like the opportunity to bring some of those voices into the room on some of those key subjects that I've just touched on. So to begin with, if I may turn to Baroness Randerson. I mean, the question I would love you to reflect on Baroness Randerson is the importance of modal switch was highlighted by many people that I spoke to. And of course, the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government, Transport for London have got targets to reduce to modal shift targets and to traffic reduction targets. I would be very interested in your reflections on that whole subject, if I may hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. Can I start by saying that as a resident of Cardiff, I was delighted to hear about the partnership with the Welsh Government, which is exactly the kind of detail that we need in order to get some flesh on the bones of the excellent targets that Claire referred to earlier on. We had those targets, in the time of Theresa May as Prime Minister, and we are now well through a decade on from there. And we're still waiting for the flesh on the bones of some of those targets. And unfortunately, we had a bit of backpedaling. You can't do transport, can you, without a horrible pun somewhere? But backpedaling is entirely the wrong pun. But we had backpedaling last year, and that is the kind of thing that really slows things down. The industry has rallied beautifully, wonderfully, sees the economic opportunities which haven't been stressed frequently enough, I think, by politicians. But we haven't yet had the kind of strategic organisation we need to get the modal shift that you're talking about. Can I give you a very local example of the challenges that have to be faced? As I say, in Cardiff, we have a local government and a government at Welsh level very, very keen on modal shift. But at both local and at national level, we have a massive job because the public transport structure is so poor that, and my constant refrain is you're not going to get people out of their cars and onto the buses and trains until they turn up sort of as frequently as they do in London. I don't know how many people in this room live outside London, but those of us who do know it is a different world. And if we're going to make that change, we need a major financial, economic investment by government at every level to get us from our cars into the buses, onto the buses and trains. Buses much easier than trains, of course. But also we have to have the political rhetoric that goes along with it, because it's not always comfortable to carry a heavy shopping bag and things like that. So you've got to get people thinking the right way. Otherwise, you, Claire, in your press release today, refer to political vagaries. I loved that phrase. We have a political vagary coming up this year. It's called a general election. And therefore, everyone in this room has a golden opportunity to tie government down and potential government down on the details, the nitty-gritty of how you get that modal shift. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's wonderful to hear. Now, moving on to my next invited speaker. It's quite topical because I think there was a report came out just today on how the Labour do not kind of lose confidence in the 28 billion. But anyway, without any further ado, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can really maximise this for UK PLC, competition, industry, all of that stuff. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Well, I touched it, and so did you, Claire. And it's delivery. I don't think I need to mention, and what a passionate thoughts we've heard. I don't need to mention to anyone in this room about the importance of decarbonising prices, and that we need a strategy, we need a way to do it. But to think of that on its own without thinking about the industrial strategy and what that means to us. When we think about the industrial strategy, we just heard about buses. Well, that's a service strategy as well, right? Or an IT strategy. So what do we really mean by all these different layers of strategies and how do they fit together? We have 4 grand challenges at the moment. We can remember them correctly. We have AI and data, we have the ageing society, we have clean growth, and we have the future of mobility. We have lots of other things as well, people innovation. Okay, now those 4 I listed. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because we all got here today because we had a demand, we had to travel. Yeah, so I go to work because I travel. I go to the football games with my sons because I have to travel. The goods come to my house through transport. All of these things are happening. So it doesn't matter whether whichever one of these strategies we look at, transport underpins everything we do, is the point I'm trying to make. If we want to change an industry that is supporting all these other things, therefore operates at incredibly low margins, typically, a government needs to be able to share some of that risk of change. So by strategy to work, government can't take all the risk, of course it can't, but it's got to underpin some of the risk. So we make enough risks, invest in enough of the right things to see it happen. So that's the innovation, that's the trialling. I think we do that really well, actually. There's some really good examples of it. A bit like the policy argument that Philip touched on. Do we deliver? Do we adopt? And do we take forward at scale to generate the jobs, the industry growth? So if you put 28 billion in, I want to get 100 billion out. We're not doing that, in my opinion. Okay, and you can challenge me on that later, but I don't think we're doing enough of that. Invest and properly then demonstrate that happened and was adopted and was scaled and we got the bus services that were then making money. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So my next impromptu invited speaker, Hilary, Henry Chipping, who is the Chief Executive of the South East Midlands, but also importantly is the chair of the Transport Knowledge Hub that we worked together to create some years ago now. So we've worked together for a long time, Hilary. I would just love your reflections, really, just over to you, Hilary. I mean, the decision-making, how complicated things have become. Over to you.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Claire, for inviting me here today. As you say, we've worked together over a long time. We both share a passion for the subjects that you've been hearing about this morning. But I think I just wanted to really say a few words, and it's summarised very well in Claire's report, about the fragmented nature of decision making, particularly around investment. So, we've heard a lot today about lots of policies, lots of really good targets, local authorities, central government saying that this is what they want to achieve. But I think absolutely right that we've got to really focus on delivery. And in order to deliver something, we all need to be clear about not just developing a strategy, but how is that going to be funded over time. And I think that's one of the real challenges we have at the moment. As Claire said, I'm Chief Executive of a local enterprise partnership now, and I really believe in partnership working, and I'm so pleased to hear about the new council, because the one thing that local enterprise partnerships, I think I would say demonstrated really well, is that you need to work with local government, with business, with the academic sector. You need to focus on skills and infrastructure and that whole range of issues, bring them together. And also, I would suggest work across a larger area, whether that's a regional area or some of the subnational transport body areas are very large, but that collaboration and clarity about what's to be achieved. I mean, as Claire said, you have to look at every aspect of life, housing, transport. We all depend on transport, as we've just heard, but it's very complicated. There's lots of really complicated issues that rely on innovation, new technology, new fuels, and it is very complicated for local politicians with the best will in the world to actually know how are they going to deliver that. And then, of course, we have the very complex issue of how we're going to change people's behaviour, as Baroness Anderson, I think, talked about very clearly. The area that I look after at the moment, anyways, is called the South East Midlands, but basically it's that it's a mixture of urban and rural areas, and people rely on public transport to get around. It's not easy, and so they turn to their cars, and we really need to help people to have other sustainable ways of travelling. And in order to do that, the way in which funding decisions are made and investment is planned has to be on not as fragmented as it is at the moment. It has to be brought together and integrated. And I believe that's one of the most challenging issues that we have at the moment in order to integrate those funding decisions. At the moment, some national transport bodies are doing a really good job, and they're working on prioritisation and skills, but the strategic road network, which contributes a lot to, it's funded in one way, local roads in another way. The whole cycle for investment in energy and other forms of infrastructure is on different timescales. Fragmented. People don't really know where the funding is coming from and who's going to make the decisions, and that's something I think we really need to tackle.
Thank you. All those areas that you highlight. Thank you, Hilary. So my next invited impromptu speaker, you know who you are. Before I ask you to come up, Chris Ashley from the World Haulage Association, I mean, I have found your feedback absolutely invaluable, because I mean, the essence of this whole thing, this transition, if it's not a fair and just transition, it ain't going to happen, So your perspective, I believe, from the perspective of the Road Haulage Association, but SME generally, I think is particularly crucial for us at this stage in the delivery. We're moving into this delivery phase. So if I may invite you to the stage, the floor is yours, Chris.
So thanks very much, Claire. Yes, and thank you for the introduction. If you don't know me, I'm Chris Ashley from the Road Haulage Association, and if you don't know about the RHA, we are a trade body representing just over 8,500 hauliers up and down the country. Look, as a trade body, we support net zero. We, of course, understand the imperative to decarbonise. And I'm pleased to say that hauliers, both large and small, are getting their plans in place, and where they can, starting to introduce, the zero emission vehicles that we all want to see. Like to, if I may say, welcome the leadership from Zemo partnership. We stand ready to support, the next stage in this transition. We've touched on some of the challenges already today. Lack of a detailed roadmap. Yes, we would add our voice to that. Particular practical challenges, the lack of infrastructure at the moment we have to our heavy commercial vehicles. But I think, frankly, I also need to mention another challenge, which is this is expensive. The latest price tag put on decarbonising the haulage sector is estimated to be about £100 billion. And so our ask is, to ensure on behalf of the SMEs in particular that they are included in this transition. It's going to take, and the word's been mentioned already, collaborative working to get the right policies in place so that we bring everybody along. And I would like to say, I think we have had a bit of a shaky start, if I may say so, with regards to clean air zones. and perhaps here in London on the ULEZ. Our hope is that we can move on from that. And in order to move on, as I say, it does require collaboration, understanding what sort of our needs are and our very complex needs are, so that we can put in place these workable policies. As I see it, if we get the right policies, the right conditions, and may I say the right financial support in place, we can actually do the heavy lifting to phase in the technologies. That's what we can do, but we do need the right circumstances to do that. So with all that in mind, that is our ask to this audience today. And we at the RHA stand ready to work with you and beyond to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. And last but most definitely not least, I'd really like to invite my predecessor, Andy Eastlake, to say a few words at this point, because Andy, you have been an inspiration to all of us. And what I have found so valuable about working with you for so many years now is how you are able to spot what's coming and the big things that we're not necessarily all looking at. And I would really just be interested in your steer, your reflections, your insight, whatever you want to say really, but in particular, that piece around kind of reducing embedded carbon in all the infrastructure we're building and how do we sweat the assets? The floor is yours, Andy.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for the kind introduction. Firstly, a quick thank you for all the work that Claire has done in putting this together, an incredible piece of work that she's put together in very short order with the support of the team. So compliments to all the team on that one. I do like alliteration, so I'm going to pick up on some of the comments. We've had the call for clarity, we've had the call for consistency, and I think communication is one of the other key things. And I think it's really important that when I started my career 40 years ago, we were focused on low emission miles. It was all about trying to reduce the emissions from the tailpipe of a vehicle. That progressed as low CVP came on stream, that progressed into low carbon miles and trying to reduce the CO2 from the tailpipe of the vehicle. And as many of you will know, that actually had some unintended consequences on the emissions from the vehicle in certain circumstances. Now we are focused on, at the moment, it appears, this zero emissions mile, zero emissions at the tailpipe. Now, it's laudable, and for many years, and since cars have been around, the bulk of the impact of those has been from the tailpipe. But as we move to that zero emission tailpipe, actually, the bulk of the impact moves to the embedded carbon, not only in the vehicle itself, and we're all involved in this and obviously know about batteries and the resources that are required in those, and hydrogen fuel tanks and carbon wound tanks, and all of that actual embedded emissions, embedded greenhouse gas in the vehicle itself. But if we go to this zero emission mile, and I operate in a lot of these groups and things, and the public at the moment are saying, well, the reason I want I won't take my electric vehicle is there isn't the infrastructure. I think there's a piece coming out this morning actually about the lack of infrastructure again. And if we followed what the public want, we would build the 2 or 3 million charging points that have been called for by some parties, and we'd actually embed a load of carbon into another white elephant. So I think one of my pleas, and if you like, I do intend to stay around and support Claire. And one of the areas that I want to continue to support that is by looking at this bigger picture, by increasingly looking at the complete embedded carbon, not only in the vehicle, as we've said, Zemo, low CVP before that, and its members have been really focused on life cycle emissions of vehicles, but the life cycle of the infrastructure that we are now implementing is a real risk to us if we do it badly, because we've worked out how to get zero emission tailpipe vehicles. That bit we kind of know and we kind of understand. We've got a few challenges with some of the big ones and the costs, and nothing we can't handle, Chris, don't worry. But the infrastructure, the energy and the infrastructure, storing that energy, delivering that energy to where it's needed, when it's needed, and how it's needed, is going to be one of the biggest challenges. And that's why, with John's support and leadership around the Electric Vehicle Energy Task Force, the work that Gloria's been doing around all of the low carbon fuels, that is all critical in terms of that energy piece to deliver not only zero emission miles, but zero emission vehicles and net zero transport in the fullest sense. So that's, if you like, what my passion will be to support Claire as we go forward. And I'm, compliments on getting the council together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Claire, and to all of our provocateurs, I suppose I would call them, for their contributions. We've got plenty of time for Q&A and networking afterwards. We've got an immense amount of expertise in this room and indeed online as well. So I'd just really like to ask for any questions from the floor to really kick off this session in terms of whether it's around the task force itself or some of the challenges that have been thrown out in terms of what about infrastructure. One of the things that I feel very strongly about is planning. We talk about planning, but it's a bit like the Yeti, much talked about but never seen. And we really do have to, if what the Baroness was saying is absolutely spot on, unless we can get that relationship between local, regional and national planning right, then it's going to be really, really tough to make this transition. So is somebody going to help me out with a question here? Yes, please. Just say who you are and...
Andy, so all very good and really pleased that this is all... I'm encouraged this sort of activity. My question is about, we haven't heard from many members as part of this, to be going on this, because I think one of the really powerful things that Zemo has done in my experience over the years, as for instance, is the life cycle analysis stuff that you just put out. That's absolutely really practical stuff. It's got a real value. It's tools. What I'm concerned about with the council, that how are you going to avoid this being just another voice in the vacuum? We've got the RHA, we've got them, net zero people. Yep. Everybody wants to have a voice. And why do you think you can be? Why do you think you've got the mandate to play a strategic role?
Okay, I'll kick off. I'll abuse the position of chair by just kicking off, but I'll ask Claire because she's much better placed in many respects. I think the answer to that question is we absolutely do not want to create just another talking shop. We've all seen over the years plenty of task forces formed and sometimes have achieved a small amount, but many times have actually really waxed and waned and have really not added much. One of the things that has been absolutely clear from the work that I mentioned earlier that Jonathan has done, and he might want to talk to this, in terms of engaging members and stakeholders, has been almost a universal call from those members, whether they be SMEs or big corporates, whether it's on the fuel side or on the automotive side, is that actually this needs bringing together, but bringing together with a delivery prism, not particularly a policy prism. Because as Chris said, we've made one or two false starts with what looked like strong policies, but actually, what's that phrase? You know, it's execution, execution, and execution. And frankly, in some of these areas, we have not done a very good job. So we feel that there is a call from not just the Zemo membership, but a much broader membership that Claire is engaged with and Jonathan's engaged with that makes this different. But Claire, I don't know, or Jonathan, whether you want to add to that.
Yes, no, it's a great question. It's a really important question. And I am going to bring Jonathan in in a second, because the crucial point that you've already touched on, Philip, is it's this focus on delivery. And it's really just having that wider, longer term strategic, see where the problems are arising, etc. But in terms of the Zemo member engagement, it's been excellent. And I think, and in the report, there's an annex that gives a few of the early conclusions. We will be continuing as we develop this roadmap to work on the detail through Zemo's brilliant working groups. And of course, this is a very key part of the project we're doing for the Welsh Government. So the working groups are absolutely fundamental. But there was a very distinct Zemo Zero Emission Task Force created by Jonathan last year to get us to this first stage. And I just think now, Jonathan, if you would like to just say a few words about that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claire. I think, I think there's two issues or two elements to what we're talking about in terms of the new strategy. One is having that narrative, that vision of where we need to get to and how we get there. And the second one is that bringing that advice to make it impactful and to get it to resonate with decision makers at a senior level. And here we've got the road mapping activity that we did for our task force, and the council, which is bringing together those senior people to bring the message home. When we kicked off the task force last summer, it indeed was sort of discussed with the board and members prior to that, and members of council. We started to undertake that during the autumn of this year, and we've had huge engagement from our members. It really has been really good, and and I could quote a number of people on roll one to actually sort of said openly amongst our workshop, saying this is exactly the kind of thing Zemo should be doing. This is exactly the kind of role that we should be playing, looking at the horizon, looking at, being the radar that identifies the big blips, the holes in the road, to go back to a transport metaphor, that we need to avoid it, we need to fill it, we need to help or mitigate against. And that's really what the road mapping activity has been about, which we're just in the process of, we've gone through this sort of first round, working the detail with our members. And it's then what do we do with that? It's about how do we deliver that? How do we bring that to a point? How do we ensure that we get that to the people who need to engage with it? And I think that's where it works really well with the concept of the council.
Thanks very much. Hopefully that's addressed broadly the question. I think under the heading of the challenge that I've given to Claire is that we want a delivery roadmap, not a cul-de-sac, because that's where some of those have ended up in the past. Other questions? Gentleman here.
That's a lot of you know, NCIA had this plan to be launched 2 years ago. Last month, one of the key issues is sort of political will, parliamentary time, and internal political pressure. Bridge that gap.
Perhaps I'll start again. I think the answer is we are not attempting to be the politicians in the room. What we feel is now necessary is, yes, of course, pressure of the right sort, whatever government we end up with later in the year, it will be part and parcel of the senior people that we appoint or are appointed to the board to interact with ministers, whether it's in the UK government, Wales or Scotland. That is definitely part of it. But actually, its differentiator is that we're actually wanting them to look at real delivery options on the ground, because I think what tends to happen is that we get a plan put together, everybody agrees the plan, and then taking it from there to the next stage is really quite difficult. Once we get over that first stage, then it becomes, I won't say easy, but easier to get that momentum. So it will be part of the council's role, and indeed part of the Zemo's broader membership's role, to, yes, of course, to be the conscience of whatever government is in power. But to the points that have been well made by several people this morning, it's not just about what happens here in Westminster. It's what happens in local communities, in the local authority level. That's where some of this action needs to take place. And about scaling it is going to be absolutely critical as well. Sorry, Claire.
Well, the only thing I would add is that the Zemo working group structure is like the engine room, and it is the absolute laser-like focus on delivery. How are we going to actually make this happen? Clear about with a part of the solution, how we make it happen. What needs to happen? That and the other key point I just wanted to, I think you probably touched on it. We've got to depoliticize net zero. Let's just take it away from politics. This is long-term planning. This is the vision for the country long-term.
I just was sorry, Rachel, you had a question.
Oh, we've got the microphone. Thank you. And we've got members, for example, John Lewis and Tesco, who are big transport users as part of that. I'm the executive director and I report to a board chaired by Theresa May. Since she got mentioned earlier, I thought I'd bring her in. My question, and I should also confess a background as having worked at DFT previously alongside Zemo, and absolutely love the work they do. And this is a fantastic initiative. So really well done and thank you for it. I think we should look at the elephant in the room as well. So in the next Parliament, there's going to be no money for anything. And the big conversation that needs to happen is about cost allocation. However much political will there is behind a kind of theory of doing something, we're going to have to make choices like, if we want to get people out of their cars, we'll have to subsidise buses and lay on 10 times as much bus network as we've got at the moment. We will have to think about whether people should pay more for their freight goods that they're receiving in order that freight haulage associations, hauliers can afford to make that change that they need to make. And I didn't see very much of that reflected in the report, but it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on how can we make the case for quite radical change in kind of cost allocation decisions, and how we also integrate this with the wider net zero system that is needed. So similar decisions. I was thinking about heavy industry decarbonisation, where the Tata Steel announcement recently, where they're going to shift to electric arc blast furnaces. They're closing their fossil fuel blast furnaces, and enormous loss of jobs there, which has been done for perfectly sensible reasons, but without thinking about the knock-on effects of that and the kind of cost allocation of supporting it. So sorry for the slightly long question, but I think this is at the heart of everything. You'll get the change you want to see if we can have a really honest conversation about who's going to pay and how that will be organised.
As always, Rachel, a great question, which is why I'm going to ask Claire to answer it initially, but I'll come back after.
Thank you, Rachel. But it is a central question. So really thank you for raising it. And also, I think part of the answer, initial answer, I don't know the answer to that, is actually having that honest conversation with the public about the trade-offs. Yeah, you know, and this is part of that, being open and honest about what delivering net zero means and what's at stake if we don't. But the question you ask is absolutely central. And all I can say is thank you for raising it. It will be something that we will pick up. I mean, it's the challenge that Labour, of course, got in defending that 28 billion. And how do we make that argument? And how can we as a sector help to protect that sum? How can we put that into investment, but also how do we really make it happen? Because we don't want to be bankrupting ourselves either. So we can't, you know, guess what? This, you know, I don't want to say there's no magic money tree, because I know somebody said that that you work very closely with, but there is no magic money tree. But we do, but the point is we can't afford not to invest. We can't afford not to. And it's how we do that in a way. And I love the question. I wish I could say more. I know it'll be on everybody's minds. Over back to you, Philip.
Well, I think my observation would be is that we quite rightly, whether it's through policy initiatives like the Skidmore report, whether it's the decarbonisation transport plan, DFT, whether it's other more private sector led policy initiatives, the emphasis, and I can understand why the emphasis, has been almost entirely on the winners. It's been about what the opportunities are for UK PLC in a competitive race with the rest of the world. And that is absolutely critical, because if we don't respond to that initiative, we've seen with the development of IRA in America, with Green 50 for 50 in Europe, and now even Southeast Asia getting their act together in terms of collaborating on these initiatives. There will be losers. And whether they're losers at a national level, so think Polish miners, think German lignite mines, there are significant communities that are going to be impacted as a result of the transition. So I think there does need to be an emphasis, or more of an emphasis, on how we manage the losers, whether they're losers at an individual household level, a community level, or even at a national level. And unfortunately, and this is where I will make a small political comment more broadly, is that politicians tend not to like to talk about losing. They only want to talk about winners. And my view is, if it's not a just transition, it will just be a transition. And that will really lead to some social tension and a lack of cohesion, which means that what we're trying to do will be put in peril. So I think I don't have a golden answer to your question, but it is absolutely the question that needs to be asked. And I would just ask everybody in the room, individually and collectively, to be nailing that on the politician's mast at every opportunity. Sorry, gentleman there, and then gentleman here.
Yeah, thanks. Transport and energy. Welcome the initiative to obviously try and break down the silos, which is something that we've been working very hard to do over the last 3 years. One of the things that came out very strongly at our forum event last year was the need to speed up connections to the grid, working with the energy networks and obviously the likes of National Grid. So are you going to be bringing in the energy sector into these talks and into this sort of roadmap of delivery, as you call it? Because I think that this year is a key year for delivery. I mean, every day is arguably, but project. I think you're definitely going to need the energy sector on board of what you're doing. I also welcome your initiative to look at it from a local level. We actually fully fund the council places at our event as one example, because they're the ones that are going to be the doers at a practical level. And if ever there's an example of silos that exist within a silo, it'd be at a local authority. So that's going to be a big challenge. But just welcome your thoughts on how you're going to bring the energy sector in.
Well, yeah, I mean, so to focus on it, because it's absolutely, without that integration, it's not going to happen. I mean, my initial response is that the Electric Vehicle Energy Task Force was so welcomed and was I mean, that's the starting point, and we've absolutely got to build on that. So we will be looking very hard and we're discussing with others involved in that. But how can we really reignite the EV but to go beyond just cars to every, vans and everything else. So I think that's our beginning of an answer. Thank you for the question, though, because without it, again, just like Rachel's point about the money, but it's the funding and it's actually joining it up, because
Just at its highest level, this isn't an automotive transition. This is an energy transition. This is a transition fundamentally from molecules to electrons. And if you start to think of it in that way, those questions that drop out of it in terms of grid capacity, in terms of the points that have been made about moving people off roads onto public transport, all of those are issues about that energy transition. So without giving anything away, certainly as we move from DNOs to DSOs, and with a national DSO, I'd be very disappointed if they weren't seriously represented on the council. That's all I'll say at this stage. Thanks. Sorry, the gentleman. Sorry, I'll come to the lady at the back. Sorry, I didn't see you. So we'll come to you.
Sorry. Hannah Bartram from ADEPT, which represents local authority directors of place, which includes transport within their remit. So I was picking up on a point that Andy made actually about embedded carbon, and you talked about embedded carbon in the EV infrastructure. And I guess this is an ask really not to forget the embedded carbon in the highways infrastructure generally. We spend billions and billions on highways maintenance every year, plus untold amounts on new roads and all of the infrastructure that sits around it, like lighting. I appreciate there might be it's not talk about vehicles, but it's also a really important part of the picture. So just to ask that you consider that when you're taking your integrated approach, Claire.
100%, Hannah, 100%. Thank you. And it's great work that you're doing to do your live labs on that. So that's going to be really useful to get the kind of feedback and the results of that and how we can replicate. No, thank you.
Thank you. Campion from TRL. The challenge with this subject is everything's linked to everything else, of course. My question is about what you mean by delivery. Because to go back to, I think, the last 2 or 3 questions, we could characterize those as saying we've set up markets in a certain way. Markets are just a piece of technology we design. And we've run the experiment and we don't like the outcomes. And a lot of the buts that everyone has about this come fundamentally back to this point. But the world as currently designed works like this. And it's naive and futile to imagine that we can wrangle it just by argument to a different configuration. So to what extent does delivery include these macro challenges of thinking about the way that the energy market is composed? It delivers certain outcomes because that's how it's designed to deliver. We want different outcomes. We have to design it differently. The same is true of every single, interrelated system we've got. And I'm struggling a bit, but in a pleasurable way, with what does delivery mean in that context? Because you said, well, it's not really about policy, it's not really about diagnosing the problem. Yes, but maybe active solutions require a bit of that as well as we go.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Great. Do you want to go first? Or?
No, I'm just going to say that links very much, Paul, to one of the previous questions about if we don't talk to those who are going to be the master planners of the grid, which however that's configured, and the balance between local and national generation is now becoming quite critical in certain parts of the country, because as you say, we've designed a system that is now not fit for purpose. So I think one of the things that we're going to be exploring is how we can actually take some of those delivery projects and using the ESO, for instance, to scale them up, because what we're fearfully bad at in the UK is not pilots. We're brilliant at pilots, but we can't replicate. And the reason we can't replicate is that everybody thinks that their bit of the world is different from everybody else's. And I'm hopeful, I can only say hopeful, that with the development of an ESO, with a different, if you like, vision of what that might look like, which has got to be a proper balance between local, central, that some of those issues will be addressed more rationally. But I accept what you're saying. At the moment, we're betwixt and between, I think is probably the most generous way I could describe it. Sorry.
Brilliant question, Paul. Thank you for raising it. And you highlighted it, you explained it beautifully, everything connects. How do we find our way through this maze to get to the other side when everything... And I think, well, first of all, a plea that we are going to engage with you more as we go forward, and we will get your insights because they are always just so invaluable. My way of looking at this is like, well, what is it we're trying to achieve and work backwards? So what needs to happen through for this to happen, to this to happen, to this to happen? And if we're finding, oh, that actually can't, then okay, of course, we have to put light on those issues. So it's not as though we're just taking everything, here it is, and on you go. You know, if we find that we can't actually do that without a tweak here or change there, then it has to be tweaked or changed if we're going to deliver net zero. So, you know, watch this space. You know, we will have to challenge some of our basic assumptions, some of the assumptions that we don't even think about because we've always done it that way, so that's how we do it and that's the way we're always going to do it. No, if we're going to achieve this really crucial target, and we know that, and we can see, and we can start to plot the steps to get there, which is all good stuff. And if we're coming across blockages in the way, and that's what the council, of course, will be about, really at a high level, but also from a grassroots level up. What's stopping it happening? You know, what's the potential showstopper? So yeah. Watch this space.
Yes, later.
Juliette Morrison, the editor of Forecourt Trader. Can you tell us a bit more about the Welsh programme, what it might look like, timescales?
I've got two people in the audience, one who's the funder and the other who's the author. So I'm not even going to attempt that. So just use the mic. It's probably easier.
Okay, so the programme we're doing with Wales, which literally we've only just 1 month into it, that was based around a conversation that we had with Welsh Government at our annual conference, where we were first talking about our road mapping exercise and looking at the trajectory for what were the narrative, what needs to happen, you know, the vision of how we deliver net zero, and working with our members to identify that in detail across the whole of the transport sector. We always intended that to be about this delivery. It's not just about national, it's about delivery happens in your street, outside your door. And Westminster Government has a distant relationship to that. It's much more about your local authority. It's much more about your regional councils, transport bodies, subnational transport bodies. It's much more about Welsh and Scottish Government as well. So if we can do that, we have to engage with them. And that was the sort of the starting point for the conversation with Wales. And my understanding is that Welsh Government were looking at a freight strategy and saw decarbonised commercial vehicles and freight as being a key element of that. An element, but a key element of it. And they wanted to work with us to take our sort of roadmap, which was looking at a national level across the whole of the UK, and say, okay, what are the evolved responsibilities for Welsh Government? Where can Welsh Government have an influence on this? Where can Welsh Government look to change the way that their strategy allows them to go further, faster, deeper than what we would be suggesting otherwise. And that really was the impetus of this. And so, in terms of scope, it's commercial vehicles, all commercial vehicles. In terms of, we're focused predominantly around a powertrain. So it's about electrification, it's about sustainable fuels, it's about potentially what the role of hydrogen might be and other solutions. And it is involved in energy distribution as much as it is about the vehicles that are going to be using those and how they're going to be operated. But that's the starting point, which will take up our initial arrangement is through to the end of March 25, a 15-month programme, which then will look to feed into Wales's freight strategy, and then we'll be looking to have developed a Welsh stakeholder forum which to act as a sounding board for Welsh Government in terms of their freight delivery.
Do you want to add anything to that?
And no, just to say that, David Monroe from Welsh Government, just to say that we're very excited about the project. This is within the context of, first of all, developing policy for our next carbon budget period, which is 26 to 2030, recognising that HGV and freight is a particular big chunk of carbon emissions from transport that we really need to focus on for the next period, but also really looking at the scope for practical delivery with wider stakeholders at a Welsh level. So very excited.
Okay, thanks, David. Thanks. Any other questions in the audience? Yes.
Thank you. Peter Harris, ex-UPS. I'd like to pick up on the question about winners and losers. You know, government is understandably very focused on green growth or growth, economic growth, whether it's green or otherwise. And Claire, you mentioned the opportunities that come through the green transition for growth. I just wondered to what extent work has been done or perhaps needs to be done to understand or stratify those winners and losers into greatest opportunities, middle opportunities, greatest losers, etc. Because clearly government's going to be more convinced by the need to invest in areas where there is going to be a greater return on investment. So if we can perhaps underneath the skin of that argument and help to direct investment in that way, because you know the net zero agenda on its own, I don't think is going to be sufficient to take government where we need it to go. It has to be coupled directly to the growth agenda. So the more concrete a mechanism we can develop or encourage to actually align the two agendas, I think the greater chance of success we will have.
Yeah, I think my only observation, Peter, would be there's a stage before that, which is actually a political recognition that there are losers. At the moment, it's really difficult to have that conversation. And I think your suggestion or steer about being able to stratify that, about which areas, which communities, which sectors, which industries are going to be impacted adversely, as well as those that are going to be subject to major growth, is really, really important. But it does mean, whether it's at a local, subnational or national level, that those politicians have to recognise that there are losers, and in their recognition that there will have to be mitigation put in place. And I'm going to be really interested to see how the UK government addresses, for instance, what's about to happen in Port Talbot and in Scunthorpe, what is almost inevitably going to happen at Grangemouth with INEOS. You are talking substantial communities being impacted. And yes, it's fantastic that some of those will be leading to major opportunities, whether it's in offshore wind, CCUS or other opportunities. But we really do have to recognise that and have plans in place, because otherwise we'll, as I say, my fear is that we'll see populists take advantage of that lack of political courage, move into that space, and the whole agenda will be pushed back. You know, I don't really relish the thought of our own gilets jaunes in the UK, personally. Sorry, I ranted there. Sorry.
So much. The other point that I wanted to add to pick up another element in your question is how we integrate this agenda with the growth agenda. Well, there is only one kind of growth possible, and that's green growth. And we have to be so clear, anything that isn't green is not sustainable. You just can't build any kind of future on. So I think in terms of aligning the agenda, I think just being crystal clear on it's green growth or there's no growth. You know, there's no growth on a dead planet. I mean, it's got to be green growth. I think is just an important sort of, if you like, meta message. But everything that Philip was saying is absolutely right. We can't afford for this, because it would be so easy to fall into some of those traps, wouldn't it? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any more? I don't think so. I'm just conscious of the fact it's getting increasingly warm, not because of the hot air, but because of a very engaged audience that we've had. We're going to wrap up shortly. I'm not attempting to summarise this, other than to say we go into this with our eyes open. We know, whether it's in terms of what we want to do in this instance with the Welsh Government initiative or with the task force, that there will be lots of people standing on the sidelines, not necessarily cheering, who may well be thinking this is just another initiative that's going to run into the sand. We think that we can, if we get the right people on board, that we can actually make a difference. That's the reason we're launching the task force. And I think probably my challenge back would be, if we're standing here in a year's time and nothing's happened, then, you know, you will have every reason to be duly sceptical. But I think we've got an opportunity, not only an opportunity. I was just seeing Nina in the back of the room there from REA. I know she was at the CBI meeting yesterday. I was talking to Tanya Kumar from the CBI, and she said to me, she said, global investors respond to the size of the investment opportunity. Ambition is important, but also, which is where my thinking was starting to form, we need to recognise that there will be losers as well as winners. And I just think within that statement, there's a level of ambition that's required. There's a sense of the challenge that is there. It's not being Pollyanna-ish. It's actually recognising there's some real challenges here. But I'm just hopeful that the initiatives, should I say, that we've launched today will go some way to ameliorating, meeting that challenge. Because as Claire said, if we don't meet that challenge, then the implications are massive. But thanks very much for your attention and your attendance. Thanks very much.